Hey, Steve.
We're gonna get whatever work this guy wants done today.
Okay.
I it's
Okay.
actually
Yeah, I mean, I already messaged him on Friday, but let me just call them so that you can just pick up your check. And if need be, I can go grab it and bring it to you wherever you are. I'm free this afternoon.
so Chris met with the guy. Got to put a couple guys up there. So yeah, call me back, would you? Because
Yeah, about the check. Yeah, but everything went good with John.
it's good with John.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Steve. I'll call you shortly. Bye. Oh, that was an answer. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Saved and Sassy podcast with myself, Randy Mendez, and my co-host, Crystal Riley. Hi,
Good
friend.
morning.
How are
So
you?
excited to be here. I'm good. Happy
Me too.
Monday.
Happy Monday. I'm excited. Today, our podcast episode topic is blessed and unbothered. How do you feel about that, friend?
I mean, if we're Christ followers, life should be perfect, right?
Let's ask Job about that. Let's ask Job if that is if that is the case. Probably not, right?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that with God and through Christ and having, being our minds renewed, I think that we can live a more peaceful life, but because we live in the flesh, we we can't, it's hard to grasp that peace that we can live with. And so then we create our own chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And I think one of the things when I was thinking about this topic that came to mind was Galatians 1:10, right? For am I now seeking the approval of man or God? Or am I trying to please man? Right. And so I think this is a big one. I personally have always struggled with like keeping up with the Joneses mentality, and not necessarily on material things, but just life. Like I feel as though the way that we live in our world is it's very much like a ladder of achievements and progresses and milestones, and so I think a lot of times we can get caught up in like, okay, well, they've got that. What are they going to think of me if I don't? Or they're done this, or what are they going to think of me if I don't? And then more so, one of my issues, and Crystal, you and I both talked about this, is, we don't lack confidence, but then we do somehow stumble, or I, at least, I don't want to talk for you. I stumble over worrying about like people's perception of me. And in my own head, I will decide people's perception of me based on
Oh,
like my own insecurities. And I will operate as if though, like lately I've been calling it really wrong. I'm one of those I'm really guilty of like coming up with conclusions. And I always have one person that's really close to me and they work with me. And I always tell Jordy, like when they're quiet, this is what's coming. And then that's never what comes.
that's
But
pretty
anyways,
funny.
I'm rambling and I'm a little bit off topic because it's really like how do we function as Christians and how do we walk out our faith and do the best that we can without existing in that fear of like what are people thinking and losing our peace and things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think every single person has to some extent cared or does care what people think, right? We don't want to walk around and like hurt people, so we want people to think we're nice and positive and all of that stuff. So, but I think that there's a difference where we make that an idol. I
Mm.
think sometimes we get wrapped up in it's an idol, and then that's where the sin lies. So,
Oh, that's powerful. That's powerful. You know what else comes to mind is Romans, right? In Romans, it says that we are not to be conformed of the world, right? So we're not supposed
mhm.
to look like the world. And I think that as Christians also, and this could really become a loaded topic, and today we're doing a mini episode, so we won't do that. But I think we can also take it to the far left, right? And so we can almost get to like I've had to check myself a few times because I'm so okay not following the norm that sometimes I'm like, I'm out here reveling a little too strong. And I have to remember, like, it's a combination of bringing honor to God in all that we do and not being conformed of this world, but also, giving ourselves permission not to worry about what others think of us. And I think that especially in like political climates and things like this is the moment where it's like, okay, we're pro-life as Christians, right? So it's like topics like that is our heart for this particular topic. It's like how many times do we want to say, myself, I'll say, like, I want to say I'm pro-life, but I also don't necessarily want to get into a debate with somebody, or I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or I'm not trying to make everything polarizing. And what we're saying is that we have to unapologetically stand for our faith and stand for God's word. And then we cannot worry about what people think about us based on that. And all we can do is our best. And we have to, we have to be, of course, be self-reflective and course correct ourselves. But we also have to give ourselves grace. And we have to just say, you know what, that chapter is that chapter, that situation is that situation. And I'm going to leave it in God's hands. And that's where our faith has to come in, because sometimes we as humans, myself especially, want to fix things. I don't know if you're a fixer, but I'm a fixer. And I'm like, I can make everybody happy. And sometimes I think we just need to trust that God is always working in all things for our good, and our good, not just being mine and, Randy and Crystal's good, but everybody Randy and Crystal know.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and so I had a situation with my kids, or my one of my children arise, and they're like, "You have control over that." I'm like, "Well, my kid's 19, like he's off at college, like,
Right.
yeah, could I tighten up the ropes and like take his car away, or, take his money privileges away or something, I could do something, but is that really what God's calling me to do? Or, is it having the open conversations and, he's going to live his life. So, and this person was very much, I need to do something different way. And I don't agree with that perspective. And I've never really, with raising my kids, I've never conformed to what society thinks I should do. And, I've always just done what I feel like I should do. And really it's what God and I talk about doing. And I lead from that perspective rather than, the rules and this is the way it is. And,
Yeah.
cut them off. And it's like, but I don't know. And then maybe I'm being too sensitive because it's my baby, whatever.
Right.
I don't
Right.
know.
Right.
So I got my own issues in my head, and reeling that back into like what society thinks or what the people around us think. And it's like, it doesn't really matter what other people think. It really matters what God thinks. It
Mm.
has nothing to do with Joe Blow off the street, because, or, my mom, my sister, my brother, my whatever. It doesn't matter, because we answer to God. And if we know that we're in alignment with God and we're choosing God above all else, we need to release whatever other people's expectations are. We're never going to please everybody else.
What made you, when you were talking, what it made me think of was when Job had finally kind of come to that crossroads where he was like, so after his wife basically was like, why are you holding strong to faith? And then the three friends came and gave their opinions to him, right? And
Uh-huh.
they all gave their perception of why God was doing this to him. And he kind of finally reached that point where, he did go and basically have it out with God, if you will. Not only was he enlightened, but what I took away from that and from Job's story was that God wasn't upset once he finally did like say, why are you doing this, and question things. He was actually happy that he came to him, right? And so when you were talking, it just made me think of that, like the power in coming to him. And I think that that's one of the biggest takeaways for this episode, is that we have to allow him to be our comforter. How many times in situations, and this is something that I have been guilty of consistently in multiple relationships, business relationships, personal relationships, I have been so guilty of wanting to have a human comforter, of wanting to give the full detail, the full story, and get reaffirming, affirmation and input from humans, right? And I've had to learn at the end of the day that God is my comforter. I remember, 10, 15 years ago when my marriage was going through a really pivotal time, I so much wanted my husband to see my point of view. And I remember God saying, I know. And that was like a shift for me in my change in my relationship with God, because it was like I no longer existed in a place where I had to make sure everybody understood and that everybody knew the story, according from my lens. He knew. And I actually weirdly and oddly took comfort in the fact that he knew the whole picture and not just Randy.
I didn't just know your side.
I can really tell my side of the story well. I actually took
You are in
comfort,
sales.
right? But I actually took comfort in the fact knowing that he was all knowing,
Mhm.
and that as long as I laid it at his feet and I allowed him to, he would actually, do the work inside of me for me to see the situation more from his point of view than my point of view, right? And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways when you were saying that. It was like, yes, not to say, we're not saying that fellowship is not important. Fellowship is important. And there is insight that has to be heeded. And, But you also, as a believer, have to, as to Crystal's saying, you have to learn to stand on that own ground and accept, like, I'm going to be in your word, I'm going to be in relationships, I'm going to do everything, but then I'm going to bring it to you, and this is between you and me, and trust that he knows our hearts, right?
Right. Well, and I think like in situations like with my kid, it's like he's an adult. He's going to make his own decisions. Both my kids, they're adults. They're going to make their own decisions. So and if I want to be part of their life, which I strongly desire, and I've never been the mom that's like super controlling and you have to do this and these are, I mean, we have expectations, but we have conversations around them. And so to go and say, okay, well, if you don't do this, then you're cut off. Like my friend didn't tell me that, but that's being dramatic. But if I would listen to other people, I wouldn't be the mom that I am.
Yeah.
My kids wouldn't be as independent as they are. They wouldn't be as good of decision makers. And so for me, you were more of a people person, like pleaser, whatever. I found my comfort in God since I was a little girl.
Mhm.
It wasn't until probably the last like 7, 8 years that I've really listened to other people, and that's messed with my head so much. And if I sometimes I think I wish I could turn back time and stop listening to other people so much. And I'm working on that again because it was much easier to live my life just for God and knowing God was my comforter. And I was in a much more peaceful place and way better position than I am right now from listening to other people.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, and this is hard for us to accept, but part of why, you know, we live in the world, but the world is not perfect, right? Like, it is a fallen world,
Mm-hmm.
and God chose to give us free will.
Mm-hmm.
But that is also part of why God, allows, because everything is under his rule. Ultimately, he is
Mm-hmm.
sovereign, right? But that's also why he allows the adversity, is because that's where our character is built. And I took
Right.
comfort in, I think I've told you this before, but, like, there was once upon a time that I was like in a little panic season, because we've seen those pictures, like when, for instance, I think it was Saddam Hussein was still alive. Like, we've seen the pictures of people worshiping in the Middle East, and they're like bowing, and, like, everybody's just, I at one point had like this vision in my head that that was heaven. Like, we're just going to bow all day long to God. And I kind of went into a little panic, like, wait, what? And so God took me on a journey of understanding free will, and that if he wanted like robotic worshiping, he would have just created it. Like, that's not what he wanted.
Right.
He wants us to actually choose and pursue a relationship with him, right? And part of that process is refinement. And so I think that, when we can take comfort in the fact that when we make decisions, whether people agree with them or not, they may be completely correct, they may not be. But we can take comfort in the fact that the refinement and the journey and the character building is part of our process.
Mm-hmm.
And again, to echo what you said, it's just so important that that's a relationship that we have, that we walk out with him. And that's all that, God really wants, is us to come to him and to lay things at his feet, and to have a pure desire for him to do that inside of us, and not to, again, not to say that we don't heed it. A couple months ago, or about a month ago, as you know, my husband was going through some different medical things, and my pastor had given me a word that he had for me, and it was like, I wanted to heed that, and it was a very powerful, very serious word, and I wanted to heed that, but I also needed to understand that I couldn't be dependent on my pastor for my interpretation of what he had for me. I had to take that to God and ask God to give me discernment and wisdom as to how to walk it out. And that's the really big thing, is that we need to understand at the end of the day that we cannot allow the voices, the opinions, and the relationships around us, not even the most intimate, not even the spouses and the children, to derail us from making sure that God is the ultimate person that is guiding our path, right? Which can be tough. It can be tough because, like you said earlier, like, nobody wants to be like, none of us want to be disliked, I don't think.
I mean, depends. No, just kidding. No, I think we all truly desire to be liked and we desire to be in relationship. And I think especially like since COVID happened where, things kind of shut down and then people were um what I don't know what the word is, mind blank.
Isolated.
Isolated, thank you.
Yeah.
And people were being isolated. And I think that has shifted things to where people have realized how much we really do need to be in community. I think being in community, and people are craving that. And then all of the social media and all the things that you see, and then it creates all these other issues in our minds. And it's like it could be so overwhelming for people, especially if you don't have a strong foundation built with God.
Yeah. Yeah. So ultimately the takeaways here are, and we talk about this a lot, always be self-reflective, always, operate in a way that you should be, pleasing and honoring to God. Right. But not, you shouldn't overly be concerned with what other people think about you. I mean, there's a worldly saying more than a biblical saying, like, what people think of you is none of your business. What people think of me is none of my business. Right. And we shouldn't be worried about our image. We need to trust God in whatever he wants for us, and whoever he wants us to be in relationship with, that he's going to cultivate that and to steer that. Right. So hopefully, and I'll just leave you with this, Crystal, I will say, my mom got that feedback a lot as she was raising me. I remember my aunts calling her out very specifically, and we were all very close, and we, all of us cousins hung out all the time. And my aunt got a slew. I mean, my mom got a slew of feedback from two different aunts on both different sides, on different sides of the family. And they would tell my mom that, she was too much my friend, or that she had too much of an open door policy, or they would tell her this, or they'd tell her that. And I say this with the utmost respect and love for my aunts and my cousins, but I will say that, the trials that each of us went through were vastly different. The exploration of drugs and different things was vastly different. And today, the relationship, I will say, recently one of my cousins has really come to love the Lord, which I really, really am excited for her. But the relationship up until recently, I was the only one with a relationship with God, and I was the only one. There's been a lot of this, like, there's been a lot of this to my mom. Wow, we never imagined Randy would turn out this great, or wow, we never imagined Randy would be this solid, or you know what I mean? Like, there was just a lot of surprise. So,
Mhm.
To our listener out there, if you are, as Crystal said, pouring your heart in and following the way that God calls you, then continue on that path, as long as it is honoring to God
Mhm.
and pleasing to God, and in alignment with God's word, and not, not adding anything to God's word. Then follow that regardless of the input of the people around you. This is, I think, the most powerful thing that we need to learn, especially in today's day and age. You can disagree without having to have separation of relationship.
Absolutely. I totally agree. You can agree to disagree. We do it all
Mhm.
the time in our household
Yep.
because
Yep.
we all have very strong personalities, and it's okay to agree to disagree. So, yeah,
Yep.
totally agree.
Well, we
And
will.
love people where they're at.
Well, we're agreeing to disagree. Well, we will end on that note. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And friend, I will see you next week.
All right. Sounds good. Have a good week,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye.